In a world where the pressure to conform to specific masculine ideals is escalating, evidenced by bizarre trends like men shaving their eyelashes to appear more manly, Stephen Graham's Adolescence delves into the deepening masculinity crisis affecting young boys today. With violence against women on the rise in the UK, along with the consumption of harmful online content which convinces boys that they are victims of a broken system, this series couldn't have come at a better time. When asked in an interview what inspired co-writer and actor Stephen Graham to create this series, he said that he was struck by a string of unrelated news stories of young British boys having stabbed girls. These incidents had, quote, hurt his heart and made him consider what was going on in today's society where young boys feel a need to stab a young girl to death. The 4-episode series, set in a fairly quiet suburban town, opens with a fairly relaxed shot of detectives Luke Bascom and Misha Frank waiting to raid the Miller household in order to arrest 13-year-old Jamie Miller on suspicion of murdering his female classmate Katie. Jamie's arrest takes up the majority of the first episode. We as the audience shadow the entire criminal procedure, starting with his arrest in the morning, all the way to the interrogation scene, where we are shown the first concrete bit of evidence that nails Jamie to the crime. The show's brilliance lies in its subtlety and attention to detail. Having watched many great crime thrillers which depict police proceedings, I've never seen the criminal system being depicted with such an attention to the finer details. The show allows us a rare insight into proceedings post-arrest that are rarely, if ever, shown on TV or film, such as what goes on in the medical room while saliva, blood and fingerprint samples are taken, what type of questions are asked to a minor to ensure that they are fit to be interrogated, as well as the subtle liberties that are taken by the officers to ensure that Jamie is as relaxed as possible. These liberties take the form of making sure that Jamie is eaten before being interrogated, and then later on in episode 3 when clinical psychologist Bryony makes sure to bring Jamie a cup of hot chocolate to establish a sense of trust when interviewing him. All of these minor yet critical details are crucial in cementing Adolescence as a revolutionary piece of crime thriller. The reason that the show is able to go into such detail is due to the fact that each episode was filmed in one continuous long take. This becomes the show's signature style. The interrogative camera work works to discourage us from looking away from the types of necessary conversations we often turn a blind eye to in the real world. This avoidance is often marked by a belief that it is someone else's job to iron out societal issues. The real crisis, therefore, is our belief that we'll be rescued by someone else. Parents often believe that it is the responsibility of schools to iron out behavioral issues, while schools blame the parents. In an interview about the show, Stephen Graham states that the main aim of the show was to create conversation in the home with parents and their children. Schools also have an obligation to teach children about the world as a whole, so we're all accountable. The show's camera work highlights this idea of accountability and responsibility by forcing us to keep watching, even if the conversations feel too heavy or taboo. The topic of responsibility and accountability is perfectly summed up during Stephen Graham's monologue at the end of the series, during which he attempts to console his wife who blames herself for Jamie's crime. He tells her, "We couldn't do anything about that. All kids are like that these days, aren't they? You don't know what they're watching in their room. Look at that fella who popped up on my phone, going on about how to treat women, how men should be. I was only looking for something for the gym. You can't keep an eye on them all the time." Subtlety also becomes a trademark of the show, especially in its character transformations. In episode 3, which takes place 7 months later in the show's timeline, we see a completely different Jamie to the one we left at the end of episode 1, who is vulnerable, scared, and shaken by his arrest. During the episode, Bryony meets with Jamie in order to assess his character for the trial. Jamie starts off charming and witty, but when confronted with situations where his powerlessness within the dynamic becomes apparent, he resorts to threatening Bryony, overpowering her physically by standing over her and yelling, "You do not tell me when to sit down. Look at me now. You do not control what I do with my life. Get that in that little head of yours." At this point, it is worth giving a huge mention to Owen Cooper, who plays Jamie. Considering that not only was this show his first acting gig, but also that this episode was the first thing that he filmed, proves that he is certainly a talent to look out for. His ability to switch between a harmless, insecure 13-year-old boy to a scary and unpredictable, violent young man is flawless. Anyway, as the series unfolds, we see Jamie's confidence crumble under the weight of his self-perception, shaped by the judgments of others. While struggling with self-worth is a common teenage experience, for Jamie it becomes his undoing. We realize that the reason Jamie stabbed Katie, besides his internalized misogyny, is because she bullied and branded him as an incel online. This, coupled with the fact that she rejected him when he asked her out, worked to deteriorate his self-worth to the point where he continues to believe Katie's perception of him as ugly even after she's long gone. And in a world where the definition of the perfect man has been hijacked and infiltrated by political terrorists hoping to cause a reaction which they can convert into views, this show forces us to consider what the effects of this would have upon a child as young as Jamie. We continue to see the effects of the deterioration of Jamie's self-worth during his meeting with Bryony, during which he repeatedly asks to see her notes so that he can see what she thinks of him, and presumably measure his self-worth against it. At the end of the session, when Bryony reveals that this is their last, a shocked and angered Jamie yells, "Don't you even like me a little bit? What did you think of me then? Decide, come on." This scene reveals two things. Firstly, that Bryony's opinion of Jamie matters to him, and secondly, that he needs to convince himself that he is not a bad person. Probably the most disturbing episode of the entire series has to be episode 2, during which the detectives visit Jamie's school in an attempt to find the murder weapon. Everything wrong and disturbing about the younger generation with regards to their lack of empathy, as well as an overall lack of respect for those in authority, is depicted through this episode. The most horrifying thing about these children is not their disrespect for their teachers, or their random fits of violence towards each other, but probably their disassociation from the severity of Katie's violent death. The boys act as though Katie's death is one big joke, probably due to them thinking that she brought it upon herself due to her bullying of Jamie, as well as their lack of respect for her due to the circulation of her nude images, which probably deem her unworthy of their condolences. In addition to this, the children erupt into jokes and interrupt the detectives with quips when asked for information. I think it's safe to assume that a lot of their detachment from the situation has to do with their desensitization from any form of tragedy due to an early exposure of violence and death in video games, social media, and music, which has worked to numb them from feeling any kind of sympathy. I will say it would have been interesting to have an episode dedicated to Katie's friend Jade, who seemed to be the only person at that school who displayed any human emotion regarding her death. An insight into how the death affected her, perhaps paying her condolences to Katie's mum, whom she was anxious to meet, as well as her overall thoughts on her classmates' lack of empathy to Katie's death, would have been refreshing to see. Instead, we leave her to her own devices at the end of the episode, with no resolution. The theme of isolation is presented through the complex relationships between parents and children in the show, namely, the relationships between Detective Luke and his son, and between the Millers and Jamie. The parents often feel isolated from the inner lives of their children due to their inability to understand their online personas, lives, and discourse. The scene where Detective Luke's son attempts to explain the meaning behind the emojis Katie posted under Jamie's pictures provided for an insight into just how much toxic meaning is hidden behind such colorful and harmless-looking icons. Some of these emojis even I was unfamiliar with as a Gen Z, which shows how far communication has evolved in such a short period of time. This can be especially hard for parents looking to catch up. Jamie's mum sums up the theme of isolation perfectly during her monologue at the end of the series, when she says, "He'd never leave his room. He'd come home, slam the door, straight up the stairs on the computer. I'd see the lights on at 1 in the morning, and I'd knock and say, 'Jamie, come on, son. You've got school in the morning,' and the lights turn off, and he never said nothing." While the parents in the show were unintentionally isolated from the lives of their children, the children choose to isolate themselves from the rest of the world. They spend the majority of their time scrolling through social media, consuming complex and extremist content, and then attempting to alter their online personas to reflect their half-baked understanding of what they've taken in. The show reaches a resolution during the end when Jamie decides to plead guilty, showing that with the right support and time to process what he has done, away from all the noise, he can finally accept what he has done. Overall, Adolescence becomes a warning. If we ignore the radicalization of young boys, it's young girls who pay the price. Overall, the show does a great job at achieving what it hoped to set out to do: create conversation. There has been much more discourse online regarding the show, its message, its technical prowess, as well as the incredible talent on set, namely Owen Cooper and stephengraham, who is gut-wrenching as a heartbroken dad trying to keep his family afloat following the aftermath of the crime. That's all for today's video. Let me know what you thought of the show, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more film content. Bye.